Hello, how are you doing? Thanks for joining me. I hope you're well. You find me in Stockport, as is quite often the case, and today I'm going to be talking about the difference between using a 28mm and a 35mm lens on a full frame camera. And I'm also going to make this into a little bit of a gear test. I've not done a gear test for a while because I have a very exciting new addition to my armoury to try out. I will tell you more at our first location. Let's crack on. Most compact 35mm cameras that I've experienced have a lens around 35mm because that's a good do anything carry around lens. But why is it a 35? On an SLR the standard lens would be a 50. So is it actually the right lens or not? That's something we're going to explore today. So I've wandered down to the first location that I want to shoot today, which is a roundabout, which may seem like a rather strange thing to want to photograph, but there is a reason for it and I will tell you more about that later. But the most important thing is what I'm going to be shooting it with. Now, those of you that follow the channel will be very familiar with this camera because it's my go-to film camera that I carry around with me everywhere. It's the Olympus XA2, fixed 35mm lens, 3.5 aperture. Now what I've got in this pocket looks pretty much identical, but it's not. This is the Olympus XA4 and the main difference is that this has a 28mm lens. So will I find that the extra angle of view in this, there's about an extra 10 degrees of view in this one, makes it a better carry around and a more flexible camera than this one? Or will I find that the 35 is actually the best? We will test it in various places, but we'll start off with this roundabout. So why this roundabout? Well, it's actually a very special roundabout because a mainline railway runs underneath it and it is going to be closed to traffic for a year while essential replacement work takes place. And I'm going to document some of that because of my interest in local history. So that said, let's look at this first side-by-side comparison from the two cameras. The 35mm lens on the left, the 28mm lens on the right, and you can see, although neither of them is a very exciting photograph, as a documentary piece you get a little bit more context and sense of scale with the XA4. So straight away here I'm thinking, yes, a 28mm is offering me opportunities that are not really available to me with the 35. So here is an interesting situation where I can test out the 28 against the 35. As you can see, I can't get any further back to photograph what's over here because there's a fence, and that is a really interesting RV. I like it. I just want to get a picture of it. 35, I don't think I'm going to get the whole thing in, maybe not even 28, but let's give it a go and see what we get. So in this side-by-side comparison, you can see that the XA4 is the clear winner here. You haven't got the front end snipped off as you have in the XA2 shot. And there isn't any real apparent distortion around the edges as you can get with wide-angle lenses that would concern me. Because when you're photographing objects, it is really important not to get unwanted distortion. One of the things that I like to do is get pictures of architecture. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? I can't actually go in there because I think it's a site or something, but I want to get a picture from out here. Now, will I be able to get it better on the 35 or the 28mm lens? Let's give it a go and see. So another side-by-side comparison, but this time I've actually done a little bit of straightening and cropping as I would to an architecture shot when I don't have a tilt shift lens available. You can see that with the XA2 I've lost a little bit of the corners of the building because there wasn't enough extra space at the edges of the frame to do my straightening, and I couldn't get any further away because the gates would have come into the shot. Whereas with the XA4 there's a lot of breathing space which has allowed me to do a gentle tilt shift and make sure everything's perpendicular while still keeping a little bit of space around the main building to give context. So as you know, one of my things is street photography, and when I'm shooting street photography, sometimes I'm shooting from the hip or from around here anyway, and it's important to be able to get the shot when you can't see through the viewfinder. And I think that might be something where the 28mm actually helps over the 35, because I do sometimes find that there's less in the frame than I thought there was going to be. So to test that, I'm just going to stand here and I'm just going to wait until group of people go past and set off both shutters at the same time and see which gives me the most pleasing result, which gets the most in the frame at the time. Yeah, one of the great things about this camera is it's very insignificant, it's very unobtrusive, but when you stand there with two cameras waiting for people to come down the street, they do see you and they do wonder what you're doing and they do tend to move out of the way. So I wasn't able to get a brilliant comparison here, but you can see that the XA4 gets more into the scene and there is enough resolution that I can then crop in to the bit that I really want without it becoming a degraded image. I also managed to grab this shot just a little way down the street, and you can see that the XA4 shot, to my eye, is superior. It's not just that I was crooked on the angle of the XA2, because again I was holding the two cameras, but I think the perspective is better as well. And the results are slightly sharper, which I think is maybe due to the fact that it's a slightly wider lens, and so there is less of an issue with camera shake. It might not be that, but I kind of think any marginal gain is a gain. So maybe it's time to have a little think about how the cameras are comparing with each other overall. So how am I getting on with the new XA4? I'm liking it. I find that the shutter button is a little bit harder to press than the XA2. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because it's very easy to knock the XA2 and take a shot when you didn't intend to, but because I'm used to that very light press, there have been a couple of times where I pressed the shutter of the XA4 and nothing's happened, and I've had to give it another squeeze. But I don't think that's a defect. I really hope not, because otherwise it seems to be pretty good. I am enjoying having that extra bit of angle to play with, although my brain is still composing with a 35. 35 is so close to the human eye. I know 42 is around sort of normal, but for me I find 35 just gives me what I want, that sweet spot. So jury's still out, let's keep going, see what we can get. So I wandered up to Stockport Viaduct that I've shot many times before. It will be nice to get away from Stockport and shoot somewhere else, because I'm getting a little bit bored with this town, much as I love it. And I tried to get the same shot with both cameras. I actually got a slightly different shot, and it's kind of quite an important little difference, but hopefully these are still comparable shots. And you can see that the XA4, there's more of an extreme perspective shift from the foreground to the background, which makes the image look a little bit more three-dimensional to me, which is always good in photography, unless of course you're going for a deliberate flat look. I prefer the XA4 shot here. I think it's slightly sharper again. Maybe the lens is slightly better on the XA4. Maybe it's not just the angle of view, but the actual quality of the lens. Both these cameras are many years old, so it's certainly possible that my XA2 is not absolutely calibrated perfectly. I have sometimes wondered when I've been out shooting with Lucy, who also has an XA2, why her shots are a tiny bit sharper than mine, and I think maybe it is the case that my XA2 is maybe just a fraction out, which isn't noticeable when you've got a narrow aperture, but here, using a 200 film on a slightly overcast day, there is a difference. But yeah, in terms of 35 versus 28mm, I think the 28mm works here. I think 28mm for landscape, sweeping vistas and arches going off into the distance. We want to get as many of those as possible in and make it look as dramatic as possible. So after taking that shot, I thought it'd be a useful idea to look at perspective in a more scientific way with the help of a soft drinks can. So something I always like to do is get the little details. It's like this little Coke can here, just by the motorway, and an abandoned shopping trolley behind it. And I'm going to see how the difference in perspective works with the two cameras. I'm going to try and keep the Coke can the same size in both pictures, but the background will obviously be a different size because of the perspective, so we'll see how that goes. So I've cropped in a little bit here, the same amount on each photo, because you can't really see the effect at the full frame size on this screen. And it's still not a massive effect because there is only that small difference of 28 to 35. But you can see that with the XA2, the background is larger relative to the can than with the XA4. So the shopping trolley seems further back in the distance with the XA4. Now, I don't think that's creating any particular artistic effects in this particular image, but it's just to show you that that actually could be quite an important difference with a different subject. If you wanted to really bring somebody forward and knock the background away without using shallow focus, which you can't really do at this sort of focal length, then it's a useful thing to think about. So test done, time to move on again. And after a lot of wandering around, it's probably time for a sit down because it's actually starting to get quite warm out in Stockport today. So the sun has finally got out a bit here, and it's a good opportunity to sit down, take the weight off, and maybe talk a little bit more about the difference between 35 and 28mm and about the difference between the XA2 and the XA4. So what have I discovered so far? Well, in terms of the lens, although it's only a 7mm difference, that really does change things a lot. And I think it seems likely that the 35mm focal length was the norm in the earlier XAs, as it's easier to compose with for an amateur, and it's probably more suited to casual portraits and snapshots than a true wide angle. It's harder to compose the XA4 because it fits so much more in and there's more to think about, and you need to get in closer as well to get the most out of that exaggerated perspective. The XA4, it does seem to be a step up from the XA2 in terms of functionality, and not just with the lens. It's got the DX coding, and the film loading is easier as well, because if you look inside the camera, there's no slit to fiddle with on the take-up spool. You just lay the film out and start winding. It might have been nice to have the faster 2.8 aperture of the original XA on both these cameras, but even with a 35mm lens, you're not likely to be getting much usable shallow depth of field, certainly not with the 28. So 3.5 is probably a good choice. So there we go, a little bit more background into the lenses and the cameras. And now let's go and shoot a few more frames off before we lose this lovely light. I think I've got my breath back now. So now we have sunshine to work with. I think we might be able to use these little pools of light that have been created to get something quite interesting. I think the wider view of the XA4 might really shine here. And yeah, I think the XA4 with the wider view works best. I actually didn't take a shot with the XA2, but I've cropped the XA4 image to produce what I think the XA2 would have produced, and you can see that I think the wider view is more interesting. After taking that shot, I wandered down towards the studio in Portwood, and I passed this empty bus stop with a waste ground behind it and a couple of tower blocks in the far distance. And it's a picture that I've taken many times before, but I like the isolation of the figures, and I've always shot it with the XA2 before or equivalent. And I think the XA4, you can see that extra space around the figure really makes a difference. Obviously somebody walked into the shot before I took the XA2 shot. I took the XA4 shot first, so probably the composition is better in the XA4 anyway, but I think that extra space really isolates the figure and makes it look more lonely. And it's one of those interesting things where normally you wouldn't want to shoot a blue sky. It's a bit dull, there's nothing really about it. You want some dramatic cloud cover, but it kind of gives a minimalist feel to this picture and makes it look more empty, which I think kind of works. So again, if I could only shoot with one camera, and normally I would only be taking one camera out with me, I don't want to be taking two, then I think the XA4 shot is the best. And you could, as I say, usually just crop it in and get an XA2 look. Obviously when you get up close you get that perspective difference, and we've talked about that, but yeah, XA4 winner here. So I've just nipped into the studio, and actually there's some good opportunities for photographs looking out of here, so I might take a couple of those. What I chose to photograph was my own shadow in a pool of light cast through the big windows that are a feature of the mill where my studio is. And if I shot it with a 35, I wouldn't have been able to fit the entire window frame and myself into the shot. So I didn't even bother with the XA2. I knew that that wouldn't work. But the XA4 shot, I think, yeah, it's not too bad. So I've just come out of the unit and I'm going to grab a 384 bus to Marple because I want to make a start on my next project, which I'll tell you about when I get there. So yeah, just about a 30-minute journey on the bus to Marple, a chance to get my breath back, and approaching lunchtime, handily enough, for this next little snippet. So here I am in Marple, and I'm here for a very specific reason, and it's behind me, Archer's Bakery. And that is because my next project is going to be an A to Z of pork pies. Now, that may sound ridiculous to you, but hear me out. It came to me when I was doing that A to Z of photography with Lucy, and I just thought, do you know what? I should do a project about something that I really am interested in, that I would enjoy doing, that's ad hoc, but that actually has some profundity to it, believe it or not, because the pork pie is intrinsic to British culture. It is a real important thing. I mean, my name is Swindon, the keeper of the pigs, so it's about my heritage. And these little independent butchers, bakers and places that produce these pies are few and far between nowadays. I've struggled to find an A to Z, but what I want to do is to go around each one on an ad hoc basis. I'm not going to try and eat 26 pork pies in a day or something like that, but when I'm in an area where there is a butcher, a baker that starts with A, B, C, D, E, F, I'm going to get a pork pie, preferably a dinky pork, if not a standard pork pie, or if they do something special, a chili pork pie or a Stilton pork pie, something like that. And I'm going to photograph the front, because I think that's going to be a historical artifact, because these storefronts aren't going to be here forever. I'm going to take a picture of the pie, I'm going to taste the pie, I'm going to rate the pie, I'm going to get the price of the pie, put all that together, and maybe I'll create a little book. But it will be more than an 8 of pork pies. There is a real reason for it. But let's hope that they actually have one in stock now. So I'm going to go across there and I'm going to get my first pork pie, A, for Archer's Bakery, which I believe is going to be a really good one. Why do I believe that? Because Lucy used to work there when she was very young, and she can vouch for the quality of their produce. Right, let's get in there. So I went in, had a little chat to the staff who were working, asked their permission to take a few pictures inside, and then, having paid my money, I headed off out of the store. So in this bag I have my dinky pork, £1.85's worth of gorgeous deliciousness, I am hoping. So I'm going to go and find somewhere to sit down and eat this, but first I need to take a picture of the storefront, and I'm going to do that on both the XA2 and the XA4 to see which would be the most appropriate if I was going to carry it around to do this project. Right, let's get a picture of the storefront. So really not a great deal of difference with this particular one, because I'd be wanting to crop in on the window. I suppose because I'm shooting across the street, the 35mm lens would be better because it's got slightly longer reach and I would get more detail. The thing that I do notice about both these cameras though, with this glass frontage, is the amount of reflection. It is unusual to get a sunny day in Stockport, so not going to be as big an issue usually, but I am thinking if I wanted to be able to see into the shop better, a polarizing filter would be useful on the camera, and that's not really an option when you're using a compact. So it's either use an SLR with a filter, or shoot on a cloudy day, or in the evening when the storefront will be lit from the inside, which would actually be a really nice look. It's just whether there would be a pork pie on offer at that time of day. It's something to think about. Getting a bit breezy here. I have got myself a cup of tea, because you need a cup of tea with the dinky pork, and the dinky pork from Archer's, which hopefully won't blow away on this picnic bench. I think it might. I've also come prepared with HP sauce. You can't have a pork pie with HP sauce. Not a traditional pork pie in my view. And a fork to break it in two. So this is what we will be using. But the photography bit to start with, I think a reason why the XA4 is going to be better than the XA2 here is because of the macro abilities. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break the pork pie in two so we can see the filling using the fork, because I think using a knife it's just too clean a cut, you don't really get to see the texture. So I'm going to go with a fork, and then I'm going to get a picture of it like this, and this strap apparently is exactly the 0.3 meter minimum focusing distance that I will set on here, so that I can make sure that it's completely in focus. I will take the same picture using the XA2, but I suspect that that will be out of focus. It will be too close up, it will be blurred. Right, let's get ready. So that is the distance to there. So here's a side-by-side comparison again, and at this size you probably can't see that the XA2 is actually slightly blurred, but if we take a crop and look a little more closely, you can see that the XA2 is blurred. It's slightly larger in the frame because it is the 35 rather than the 28, but even the back of the pork pie is out of focus. It would still be out of focus at the same size as the XA4 picture, which is sharp front to back. So I decided to just take a picture with the pie open with the XA4, and it's probably not the most flattering picture for the pie, but it does show what can be done. And I think that is the way to go forward for any kind of book that I might produce. I've actually mocked up a dummy page using the pie that was uncut and then the portion of the pie that was cut open, and then I've gone for another shot which I took just after the two that I showed before of the bakery, cropped to a square shape and actually a person in it for context, so that you can get some sense of life. It's not all still. Then you can see I've just done some dummy text, but I think that would be quite an interesting thing if there was an A to Z, and this was just the first of that selection. What do you think? I would be interested to know. Comment in the comment section and let me know if you think I'm barking up completely the wrong tree, or if you can see what I'm trying to do here. Anyway, having photographed the pie, the next thing to do is to eat it, and I enjoyed it very much. Right, so picnic over with. Time to get back on the bus, get back to Stockport to get some more pictures. So you'll be aware by now that I'm a massive pigeon botherer. It's always great to get pigeons in flight. So I'm going to try each of those at the same time as I did with the street photography and see if I can get a nice cloud of pigeons going overhead. I think they're all feeding over there, so I might be in with a chance. Yeah, I didn't really get a very good shot. That's the thing about shooting with film. I guess it's why the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition seemed to be entirely digital shots. You can't really fire off 50 shots in a second to get the pigeons in flight, so I missed the moment. But also you can see from this lots of lens flare from the compact cameras, but that is kind of what you'd expect. I'd say it's no more pleasing or less pleasing on the XA4. If I had got a cloud of pigeons, I think I would have got a lot more into the XA4 shot. It would have looked a lot more dynamic. There would have been a lot more three-dimensionality, as I keep talking about. So yeah, I would go with the XA4, though actually on this one, just because of the way the pigeon is, if you were going to pick one, I'd probably pick the XA2, but neither of them are exactly classics, I would say. So talking about lens flare and difficult lighting, the next thing I decided to do was look at backlit subjects with both cameras. So one thing the XA4 has that the XA2 doesn't is this little switch under here, which adds a stop and a half of light to exposure. And the purpose of that is if you've got extreme backlighting, as we have now, the sun's come out here, you can make sure that your figure is not in silhouette. Now that's a really nice feature, but I have to say that the XA2 could do the same thing, because you could just change the ISO setting here. So unless you're on 25 ISO film, which is highly unlikely, you would just up the ISO, or lower the ISO rather, and that would give you the compensation. But I guess it is open to forgetting that you've done it, and it's not as user friendly. So let's give it a go anyway. We've got this backlit image here with the Plaza Cinema behind me and this black cab. So let's add, well, we'll do a standard exposure, and then we'll add a stop and a half of light and see what the difference is. So it's clear that the adding 1.5 stops vastly improves the image, but something this also brings up is the DX coding on the XA4. When you have DX coded film in the camera, that overrides the manual setting. So even if I set the ISO to 800, if it was a 400 speed film in there, it would act as if it was 400 speed film. So what I'm going to have to do is use electrical tape to cover over the DX coding in the XA4 if I want to push or pull film. I think that's the case anyway. I need to do some proper testing on it. So yeah, this adding 1.5 stops of exposure is a really nice feature, but I would much rather have a switch on and off DX code button so that I could set manual settings with my ISO. But again, this is a camera aimed at amateurs. It's that weird thing about with the resurrection of film photography. People who probably want to experiment more with their cameras are picking up machines which were built for amateurs who would never even consider doing anything like that. So after taking that picture, I decided to pop into the interchange and see if there's anything I could grab out of the sunshine that would be worth testing the cameras with. I always love these photo booths, so I'm going to get a picture of myself reflected in the booth there. And I think this one, it's clear that the XA4 is the winner. It's a much nicer composition. You haven't lost the bottom of the booth, and it's just generally a much nicer shot. I like the way the orange of the seat matches the orange of the articulated platform to the far left of the picture. But yeah, that is a really nice shot, and shot from the hip. Well done, XA4. So I've encountered an issue. The XA4, the frame counter doesn't seem to be moving, so there's a problem. So what I've done is rewound the ColorPlus that I had in there, and I've put in a roll of foam pan, black and white, that I happen to have in my bag. So I'm going to complete the comparisons using that. So the XA4 is going to be black and white, and the XA2 is going to be colour. Hopefully the other ones that I've shot already will exist and not be multiple exposures or something like that, but we shall see. You may already know that if I've shown some along the way, but yeah, things never run smoothly, do they? But that is life. So you will have seen that actually enough of the pictures came out up to that point that it wasn't necessary to do a comparison. So what I've actually done is just shoot some more pictures with the XA4, using it how I would like to use it. And here you can see a few of them. I particularly like this one of the woman sat with a deliberately massive oversized chain holding a tiny dog. And again, there's plenty of resolution to zoom in and get detail of that, which shows the picture off to its full advantage. This one I really like. It's a little mobility scooter parked in a parking space in the car park. So you've got all these big cars and then this little mobility scooter. And I really like that composition. I think that works really well. I think this camera is really good for street photography. And what I really want to do is be getting up close and doing stuff in the mass of people so that it shows its full advantage with that wide angle lens, and also using the close-up function so that I can get some really close-up pictures as well. But I didn't have the opportunity to do this yet. That's something that's going to come, and I will try and share those pictures if and when I get them. But yes, I'm really happy with the XA4. I don't think it's a replacement for the XA2, but I think it's a great addition to that collection of cameras. If I could only have one, probably if the frame counter worked perfectly and there were no issues with it, I would say the XA4. I think the XA4 is the better camera, but my eye is biased towards the 35mm. I do like that nearly normal field of vision and the way you can fill the frame from a slightly further distance. I don't like to get right up in people's faces, so to be a little bit further back is probably more my gig. But anyway, I think it's a really great camera and I'm really pleased to have it to play with. So that's the shots, and I got the last few just before the weather turned and it started to get grey again, so quite a good point to leave it, I think. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that little gear test, lens chat, and you will let me know whether you think the project that I'm planning to do has legs. Please do subscribe so you don't miss the next thrilling instalment. Like and share this video if you would. The algorithm seems to have forgotten about me, and I feel very, very sad about that. So if you can give me a bit of love, that would be fantastic. But until we meet again, take care of yourselves, enjoy what you're shooting. Bye for now.